The views expressed in this review are my own. I encourage everyone to pick up a copy and read it for themselves. What I like, others may not, and vice versa. If you'd like to review my own work, I'll leave a link in the description. I welcome all feedback. Welcome back once again, ladies and gentlemen. Time for part 2 of my Terry Pratchett double feature. This time we're reviewing Mort, Book 4 of the Discworld series. As usual, we'll start with the story, then move on to my dislikes, my likes, and finally my thoughts. The story. Mort is a not-so-average boy with a lot going against him. He's described as all knees and elbows, a bit too smart, a bit too kind, and worst of all, ginger. Mort is the son of a vineyard owner who is concerned about his future. He makes it clear that he loves his son, but in the words of Hank Hill, that boy ain't right. Mort's father brings this up to his brother as they watch Mort unsuccessfully try to scare away some birds in a field. Mort's uncle suggests that the boy needs an apprenticeship. A master, a trade, and a potential new wife could be just the thing to make the unassuming boy into a man. Taking this advice to heart, Mort's father takes the boy to town, buys him probably the ugliest onesie in existence, and lines him up with the other boys in the market square, because apprentices are obviously picked up like horses. Mort is unhappy about this, but is a dutiful son and wants his parents to be happy. Hours pass and we round on midnight, and all the boys have been picked. Except for Mort. His father tries his best to cheer him up, in what could be one of the worst pep talks of all time, even offering him half of what sounds like a medieval hot pocket. Mort says he's not beaten until he's beaten, and decides to continue standing in the square until the last stroke of midnight. Just before the final bell tolls, a figure appears on a white horse. While parking the magnificent beast, the figure falls over. Mort, being the kind child that he is, rushes over to help the man. He notices the figure he thought was a man is actually a skeleton in a long robe. Mort has met Death with the big D, and Death has come to offer him an apprenticeship. And that is where I'll leave off the story. No spoilers for you guys this time, at least in this section. So let's get into my dislikes. Honestly, I don't have much to put here. I have some very small complaints. The princess Mort meets feels less impressive than Mort obviously finds her. But I really can't count that against him. I was a teenager at one time, and I also didn't know that red-headed women should only be approached with the greatest caution and a sturdy chair. They warm up eventually, but it's getting through that initial year. There is something at the end that has to do with accountability and logic, but I don't want to spoil the ending, and it's really not that big to mention. That being said, there's not much else. So moving on to my likes. This feels like a return to the series I first enjoyed. The one that's odd and irreverent. I didn't laugh out loud as much as I did this time around, but this book has more of a bemusing air than the slapstick of the first two. It's also darker than the first 3, but more on that later. Most of the humor comes from Mort trying to figure things out and the general oddness of Death as a character. I really did enjoy the character work in this book. Mort feels every bit the awkward teenager coming into his own. He's unsure of himself and often abusively frank. He lacks the tact and polish that comes with experience. In fact, Mort is so much the awkward teenager I started to have flashbacks. Something I don't recommend if you, like me, hated your years starting with a 1. Aside from Death, Mort's best interactions are probably with Isabel. Isabel is Death's adopted daughter, and is painfully lonely, dying for attention, and is a bit stereotypical herself. She expresses this by being unpleasant in only the way teenage girls can be, especially when they're near boys they want attention from but lack the experience or any idea about what men like. So she starts off as borderline abusive and later becomes a bit too clingy. Death as a character has always fascinated me. I believe Pratchett's take is now my favorite. Death has made Mort his apprentice more to be a companion and future husband to his daughter, rather than an actual apprentice. Something he hints at with the subtlety of an avalanche. This is something that Mort is also equally resistant to. I understand, buddy. I truly understand. There's a subplot in the story about Death becoming introspective and coming to grips with his own loneliness. I imagine it's hard to form long friendships when your job is literally showing up at people's last moments. It probably doesn't help when you're missing all of your flesh. Maybe I'm weird, but I always viewed Death, the personification, as an unfortunate figure, having probably the worst job that anyone could have. I imagine it's something like customer service, but the people didn't sign up for it, always complain about the quality, but still don't want to cancel it. Then you just make it last forever. Ugh. Memories of call centers coming back to me. On to the topic of darkness, because I like my comedy like I like my chocolate. Almost black with just a hint of sweetness. As you can guess, there's a lot of death jokes in this book. My favorite being when Mort asks how Death gets so much money, to which he explains he gets all his coins 2 at a time. If you don't get that joke, look it up and feel bad you missed out on the best macabre dad joke ever. Death chose his apprentice well because I don't believe Mort cracks a smile during his whole apprenticeship. Speaking of Mort, he probably has the best example of a character arc I've seen in a long time. I take into account that I may be completely oblivious to such things, and I'm only able to catch them when they're in mile-high letters, but at least I have something to point to when people ask me for a good example of a character arc. At least I have one that will take less than a solid week of reading time and won't make people call me a weeb. I want to mention the great thread of the book. I mentioned in my review of the third Discworld book that the threat felt mismatched, that it didn't feel like it fit in with the book and the characters. In this case, I think it was spot on. I'm a little upset at some of the rationale and logic of some of the characters, but it's not story-breaking and I still enjoyed the ending. Last on my list of likes, we meet Rincewind again. Rincewind has become one of my favorite fictional characters since I reread the first 2 books over Christmas break and decided to splurge on the second 2. We get some cameos from some other past characters, something that was nice, but I have faint worries about it for the future. Recurring characters can be fun, but they can also be a bane if done poorly. It's also been pointed out to me recently that in my review of the initial books, I referred to him as Rincewald. I do want to apologize for that. So let's get into my thoughts. I've been carefully avoiding spoilers for this nearly 40-year-old series for the past few months. It's becoming a series I can return to after reading the dreck that somehow makes it to the top of the Amazon bestseller list. That's a dark, evil place I have the feeling I'm going to have to return to frequently. I'm a big fan of comedy, something that makes me sad about the modern state of it. I'm also a fan of British comedy, no matter how many superfluous U's they stick in their words. Or perhaps I should say I'm a fan of old British comedy. That being said, I can't call this series canonical storytelling. The series is meant to be funny, and while it does have good continuity, I wouldn't exactly call it strong. I've noticed some contrast between the first 4 books that aren't exactly strong canon. I will also take this moment to remind you that in the past books the main characters were saved by reality-breaking not once, but twice. One time involved them becoming businessmen on an airplane, if memory serves. I don't think concrete canon is the first priority here. I'm interested to see where the series goes. I normally don't make it a habit of reviewing whole series by the individual book, even with big series like A Song of Ice and Fire. But normally I lump most big series together. Modern fantasy and sci-fi have a tendency to bump up on my time limit. Some seem determined to take the place of phone books as the thickest book in my house. Not that big books are bad. The best thing I can say about my feelings on big books is that they're like steaks. They can be a joy or a punishment, and it's all due to who prepared them. Alright, I've had my fun. I'll review something more recent next week. Good luck, everyone.